age. I would say older sisters again. They get treated and they treat well. Prejudice, hatred, and people language towards that.
So you know the show about two inseparable sisters, one of which ends up accidentally seemingly assassinating their entire family and then gets sheltered by the main bad guy. Believing her sister is dead, years pass and she figures out that her righteous sister is in fact alive, searches for her, and once they reunite, the bad one begs the good one to choose her over those other bitches, so it can be only two of them against the world once again. And the good one goes, "No thank you," and goes on to join the side of the conflict she used to wholeheartedly oppose before. Sure, of course I've seen Arcane. I understand, telling a sibling story is tough.
How many spice creams are you gonna eat tonight? I think I'll eat at least 4.
There are not so many storylines you can explore between two people who share the same upbringing, history, and DNA, unless you want to tell a tale of passive-aggressive bickering for 8 episodes. So you're kinda forced to take some drastic measures to make a story into a story. Like, separate them as toddlers, or inject a huge misunderstanding that will split the family apart at its entirety. And the latter concept is campy enough for it to be depicted once, but for it to happen twice is diabolically hilarious. But you know the saying about 2 nickels, it's weird that it happened twice. Oh boy. Usually I always try to never outwardly state my sheer hatred towards the subject of conversation in the first 3 to 5 minutes of the video, but damn, this show makes it hard. There's very little that is actually redeemable or digestible about the Acolyte. Some say action sequences are fun. I don't see it, but maybe it's my lack of passion for boomerangs talking. This is how this show goes. The showrunners make something happen on screen, give no viable context through writing, never through technical, creative, artistic decision making. Then they hand you over a marker with a dried out tip and expect you to fill in the logical or creative gaps left from their lack of effort, competency, and creativity. And that annoying noise the markers make when you press on way too hard. There you go, that's the Acolyte. I think the people who are adamant about loving this show don't really love it because of its substance, but because they really grew attached to the shitty coloring job they themselves did with the soulless coloring book that is the Acolyte. Like most people enjoy the romance arc that is barely explored or depicted nearly well enough, or they like to think they sympathize with either Osha or May, when they're just simply projecting onto empty shells that are these characters, or they're simply virtue signaling, which explains why most of these fans originate from Twitter. Every aspect of the show makes it look, sound, act, and even smell like a $620,000 times 151 costing fart made by a bunch of untalented egomaniacs with a singular goal of creating a fanfiction of their dreams while blindfolded and handcuffed to a Kylo Ren themed bed. Let me start from the basics, like literally from scratch. The camera work in this show is so uninspired, dull, and at times unprofessional, it makes me miss the prequels. They completely fail to add character to the way the show presents itself. There's no cinematicness to this whatsoever. The complete lack of continuity is baffling. Leslie Headland's moral code is more consistent than the perspective in this show. The camera is just there the whole time, making sure to document things, I guess. And if there is something to be communicated through visual storytelling, it's fine, they'll just have a character point a finger at it or something. One of the cinematographers is an Oscar, what the fuck happened? The same goes for lighting, the same goes for color grading. Editing is not much better, if not worse.
Well, maybe you could supply us with the truth.
Who is he?
I thought he was with you.
The same stale flow and cuts that linger for way too long, the same pacing, the same technique, except for occasional slow-mo to communicate the sense of suspense and urgency. And I don't know who the fuck specifically is responsible for the utmost lack of continuity here, but take a look at one of the most important scenes in the entire show between Osha and May. We cut to May, we cut to Osha, and cut back to May. Not only has the camera and our perspective of her abruptly and completely switched up a position, but her demeanor, stance, and expression are completely different than they were like literally 2 seconds ago. And let me calculate exactly how much this terrible sequence of shots has cost Disney. $70,000. This particular 7 seconds of objectively terrible filmmaking exclusively cost Disney $70,000. You know what? Before my Twitter besties come for me for harassment, I want you to know I will happily advocate for Disney to pay you, a random Twitter fuckwad, $70,000 instead, because I absolutely believe that $70,000 would be so much more well spent on a random weirdo like you than on a piece of garbage like this. Anyway, the best way I can describe this script is goo ga gaga that believes itself is Shakespeare. You know what happens when you give a toddler $100 million cash? Do you think they will spend it wisely? Well, now we know because the show is a physical manifestation of toddlers wreaking havoc, drooling on, chewing, and ripping all that cash apart, except those toddlers also happen to be 40. The writing of Acolyte is not just dumb, it's so dumb it somehow manages to make you also feel dumb, because what other media would have you look at a character and be surprised by the fact that this completely fictional being has no free will whatsoever? That's the extent of dumb this show makes you feel. When it comes to fiction, free will is an illusion. But it's an illusion that is supposed to be maintained and existent. And that is because there is a huge difference between a character being fictional and a character being artificial.
I don't get sick. I find it unsettling.
I think a lot of Hollywood writers these days confuse character writing with literal puppeteering. With puppets, you pull the string, the limb moves, the kids laugh, ha, we're fine. But you can't really pull strings when you're already busy holding a pan in one hand and a paper in another, can you? When it comes to writing, you can't just will a character into doing things just for the sake of it, and also maintain the illusion of autonomy and realism. Written characters are not puppets. They don't come with strings. They don't come with context or flesh. Every time you decide to lift their limb, you must first establish a foundational basis, will, and reason for the limb to be lifted by them. Otherwise, they will end up coming off as a twitchy, brain-dead animatronics, which they fucking are. At no point in the show do any of the main characters' actions or reactions have any prior basis or context. They just act as needed, and I mean the word act lightly for some, without having any established belief systems that are essential to form their motivations that would later dictate their actions. No, instead, if you look at the screen hard enough, you can actually spot those damn dangling strings, which further shatters whatever little illusion you had of them possessing opinions, motives, or free will. Okay, let's start from the weird one. The Squid Game guy is obviously the worst contender of this show, suffering from being allergic to the term contextualization. The lack of information and context for his obsession with our main character legitimately rivals Finn's simpy ass in the creepiest way imaginable. Cause dude, does the show never explain why this 40-year-old man is so attached to this random kid? Dude, what the fuck? The lack of context for his actions make him seem at best creepy and at worst PDF-Eilish. Was his character written by people with actual existent common sense and morality? A fictional person who acts like this would totally be characterized as a creepy groomer. But hey, it's Harvey Weinstein's assistant we're talking about here, so he's a righteous hero instead. We were meant to believe Soul trained our main character, Osha, as a Jedi for years. But for a show so heavily built upon the foundation of his and her relationship, damn does it not give a fuck to explore any of that in any type of way. At least make their dynamic seem at least a little bit more innocent and believable. Not even a scene establishing some kind of bond, understanding between the two. Like, you know how hard you have to try for me to bring up the Phantom Menace as a better writing example? Cause not once throughout that entire movie do you ever question Qui-Gon's intentions or why he would be so deeply impressed and enamored by little Anakin. It's not an instantaneous, I'm your father figure now thing. You see their relationship develop over time. Qui-Gon's empathy and fondness grow just as the audience grows familiar and comfortable with their dynamic. While with the Acolyte, it's more of it's this one, officer. You wanna know what I think? Saul comes off as just a Star Warsian, yassified version of Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. A deeply religious man who betrays his faith, morality, and oath because of his creepy-ass obsession over an underage girl. Harvey Weinstein is strong with this one. I can't believe we're meant to like this guy. And also, if someone has a right to throw a temper tantrum over the reception of the show, it's the guy who learned a whole new language for it. But I guess money does not buy you class, does it? I hope they at least covered his English lessons with that $620K a minute money. Yet another victim of the writers being lost in the maze called translation. There are a lot of things they want you to believe about Osha, but none of it ends up being correctly demonstrated on screen because... what can I say? We're dealing with idiots here who write what they know, which is idiots. So a brief, unfortunate summary of Osha. She was conceived by the magical act of scissoring along with her twin sister, was raised by her moms, then the Jedi showed up, she expressed a will to live with the Jedi to become one. Her sister got a little upset about that, but it's okay because she got over it real quick. But despite that, Osha's entire family dies. She supposedly gets sheltered by the Jedi, but leaves them because supposedly she's too consumed by grief and anger. And I say the word supposedly because we don't see any of this shit. The rest of the show is set years later after the fact when she discovers that her wonderful sister is alive and is pursuing philanthropy. The first half of the show, Osha acts like an angel saint sent from heaven until she meets the hot bad guy who mansplains to her that she's actually bad and she agrees, and that's the show. Leslie Headland, everybody. A queen of consistent narratives. As a little kid, Osha again and again verbally opposes going through the Ascension ceremony. For those who don't know, that's a Star Warsian lesbian baptization program with hired singing clowns. Osha resists going through it because, I'm guessing because she's scared of lesbian clowns, it's never explained, but she does say she does not want to be a witch. Why would she not want to be a witch? Because, you dummy. For the plot to work, she has to go witch is bad and the Jedi good, stupid. This show does not bother to once explain why a child whose only cultural and ideological compass has only ever been her family would be so adamant on completely rejecting the said family, home, and care in favor of adapting a strange culture she never learned to celebrate in the first place. There has to be some kind of context given to her owning this belief system, right? Like, at least give her a Jedi-themed coloring book she's obsessed with or something. In haste of making Osha a Jedi sympathizer for no reason, she literally ends up acting like she has been kidnapped by the very people who are supposed to be her own family. She treats them as more of an evil witch tribe than as ones who literally birthed and raised her. Also, her reaction becomes even more uncanny when contrasted to her sister's completely opposing reactions with whom she shares her entire DNA and upbringing with. Make it make sense. Initially, the show presents Osha as an insanely intellectual, highly ethical, sensible being with an apparent built-in moral compass, which makes her roughly the 69th Messiah of the Star Wars universe. You'd think the Doomsday would come at this point, and this is good because this means she can instinctively differentiate between evil and good without having to actually, come to those conclusions by, God forbid, forming opinions or thinking. She just has to activate that said integrated moral GPS. But the problem of relying on such magical gadgets to guide your main characters is, well, when their pattern of behavior is only dictated by something as superficial, they themselves become superficial. Osha's reasoning of joining the dark side is as non-existent as her not joining it. And this is an easy trap to fall into as a writer once you set up your characters as ones who hold values without any foundational basis. A good character is a deeply rooted and established being. And a fun fact about things with deep roots and well-cemented laid foundations, you can't just pick those things up and reposition them as you wanna. But for Osha, being picked up and thrown around like a rag doll appears as effortless, quick, impersonal, and inconsequential as a press of a button. And you can turn the dark mode option on and off and on and off as much as you want, Leslie. A shitty character will remain a shitty character. The script also continuously puts a large emphasis on Osha's failure to become a Jedi because of how consumed she was by grief and anger. But where are those grief and anger? I don't know, taking a stroll on a beach with a risen Skywalker, I guess. Her failure and history with the Jedi is painted as the main source of her inadequacy and insecurity, something that is supposed to haunt her on a daily basis and eventually becomes the reason why she falls to the dark side. But the show doesn't even dedicate a single second of screen time to exploring or depicting that same rejection, grief, and sadness behind their pain and reasoning. The latter half of the show is adamantly trying to convince you that there has always been this dark, sinister side to Osha, but the objective truth is, we have never seen her do anything but be a little angel of ethics and morality until she suddenly wasn't. Because again, she isn't a person, she isn't a character. She's a brain-dead puppet controlled by people with scissors for hands. You know how much intellectual pain I should be in to be staring at an attractive half-naked man during my evolution week and still want to wring my own neck? And we thought Kylo's helmet was corny. Remember when Ren was considered to be the worst failed attempt at copy-pasting someone else's homework? This guy right here is even a worse copy-paste of the worst failed attempt at copy-pasting someone else's homework. Like, he's the same guy as the last one, except somehow even worse. He's an evil guy, absolutely obsessed with our plain bread coded main character for no reason at all. He used to be a Jedi, then his master failed him and he wants revenge. Then offers the Mary Sue of his wettest of dreams to train her in the ways of the Force, but you know, in a dark way, winky wink. We have never seen this before. I can truthfully attest to the fact that I've read Reylo fanfiction better than this. So let me get this straight. The same guy whose apprentice just betrayed him only 5 seconds ago saw his ex-apprentice's identical twin and was not only ready and trusting enough to take her up as a new apprentice, but also magically managed to learn more about her in 3 seconds.
What you're feeling right now, this anger, this pain, this is who you are.
Than he ever did about her twin sister in what, like 14 years? Like, he didn't even see it coming that May would betray him, even though he practically raised her and didn't even give 2 shits when she took off. But when it comes to Osha, he's now not only a Star Warsian Vanga, but also a flirty suitor. Why such different approach? He can't possibly know Osha better than May to know that she is in fact better than May. And if it has something to do with simping, they're identical. And no, it's not because they're soulmates. It's because the writers need to be put back in a literature class and have their EPUB reader apps confiscated. There is a charm to Adam Driver. He seems like a talented, big, humble guy. The type of guy that would accidentally and unknowingly shake up the world of fanfiction and then has to have the term fanfiction explained to him. Now, in contrast, the Qimir guy is intentionally made and played as a fanfic trope. It feels like the character himself in universe is aware that there are cameras around him, and he's so annoying for that. I don't know how a Sith Lord from the Star Wars land would be aware of Twitter or TikTok, but it's canon. Stan Twitter exists in the galaxy far, far away, because that's the only thing that would explain why this guy is trying so pathetically hard to become the internet's new boyfriend of the month, always making sure that that single strand of hair is in his face and all of his best angles are perpetually on full display, that his pathetic attempt at a daddy voice is always up and running and beautifully painful to hear.
And, just get them in the mood and like...
the future you saw. She can kill with no weapon.
You know the Bond girl trope? In the James Bond universe, they put in these beautiful women just to have eye candy for the male gaze. I'm not saying that all of them are brainless and purposeless, but they're still there mostly for their looks. And this is him, but in reverse. Qimir might be a Bond girl, but Osha ain't no James Bond, and this is no Bond movie. This show and its runners have this attitude about them that we as women should be on our knees, thanking gods for finally giving us the dark romance we deserve, that finally we have the female gaze. But the thing is, even if you coat it with chocolate, shit is still shit. I'm not eating that. Remember when we established that before a character takes action, we have to first set up a belief system to justify the character taking the said action? Like, for example, if we have a story about twins, one of which decides to kill her sister, there has to be some in-universe motive that would be fueled by a pre-existing reasoning, right? Let's get one thing straight. May is not intended to be a crazy person. But because the show doesn't offer any information or context about her inner world or thought process, our brains try to fill out the missing gaps by assuming the most superficial shit, like diagnosing characters with personality disorders they're not intended to have. And that is a sign of one of two things. Either the character is intentionally unstable, or the script accidentally is. Guess which one is the case here? For the audience, the only reasonable in-universe justification for her messy decisions and acts throughout the entire show would be to imagine her as a complete cuckoo. But no, she's supposed to come off as completely sane. However, I don't know what your definition of sane is, but I would argue it has nothing to do with actively taking action to murder your siblings because they upset you that one time.
I'll kill you.
But remember, the writers want you to think that May's just a misunderstood poor baby. She did not mean to set her sister aflame. It just happened. The show makes an extra effort to depict May's inclination towards such unsolicited cruelty, while also at the same time goes out of its way to establish that no, she would never commit acts of unprovoked cruelty. Come on. Let's take the first scene in the entire show, for example. That is not how you introduce a psycho. In fact, that is how you go out of your way to establish that a character is in fact not a psycho. For the 100th time, if we fail or choose not to communicate what the characters think and why they think the way they think, the character will end up as a mere walking skeleton with no sense of integrity or identity. And May has no identity. She is a gold medalist of Olympic ping-ponging between ideologies and identities. My favorite two lines in the show are when she goes, "Killing Jedi? I want that more than anything," and after 2 seconds of screen time, she says, "I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to kill a Jedi." So which one is it, Mayho? The only consistent, semi-fascinating, and understandable characteristic of her character is dropped halfway through the show, which is her thirst for revenge. The show does its job at giving out enough foundational basis and context to explain May's reasoning, motives, and thought process. She witnessed the Jedi murder her family, she resents them for it and wants wants to make them pay. Neat. Perfect. Except no, that belief system and purpose that she has been building, breathing, and feeding for 16 years gets dropped in a matter of hours. Can you imagine holding onto a singular ideology and a sense of purpose for years and years, going as far as murdering people because of how devoted you are to it, but then suddenly wake up and decide that, nah, screw that, I'm gonna surrender to the very people I've been adamant on mercilessly killing, including my sister, because I want to be with that said sister. Don't you think their limbs would be yanked off at this point from the amount of forceful pulling they're subjected from the top? These twins are indeed magical because May, not unlike her sister, apparently also has a magical built-in ability to surgically remove the part of her noggin that stores the history, memory, and the resulting hysteria caused by years of being groomed and molded towards a very fucked up ideology by a very terrible person, because that totally wouldn't do a permanent damage to your psyche and moral compass. I swear to God, showrunners really do think that being a malicious, terrible person is some kind of badass aesthetic mindset you switch on and off as you please. But again, if there was a person who mastered the art of ping-ponging between being a right-hand woman of a criminal and a purified queer princess, it would be Harvey Weinstein's ex-assistant. I don't know if you have noticed, the Acolyte has a morality problem. As in, it operates based on a very questionable set of principles. It's not even funny how hard the show is trying to fish for reasons to hate on the Jedi. To have canonically celebrated good guys appear in the worst light possible, while also celebrating the Sith. I wouldn't put it past the showrunner's corrupted nature to actually intend to attempt this, but also I wouldn't put it past their idiocy to unintentionally send such ambiguous messaging. I think in the best case scenario, the Acolyte is attempting to be objective and investigative about, is there actually pure good and is there actually pure evil? Reminds you of something, except instead of actually objectively exploring the ideology and morality of Star Wars lore, all they accomplish to get across is that the Jedi are egotistic and boring and Sith are sexy or naked, so, you know, priorities. Here's a bit of trivia for you. What's your first course of action when your child runs into a room screaming for help? Turn into a black smoke, of course. And what would be your first action if you saw somebody turn into a black smoke in front of you? Stab them. Oh my god. The Acolyte thinks itself smart enough to be able to pull off questioning the ethics of the Jedi, depicting their corruption and their flawed ideology that apparently brings upon ruin, but it only just ends up having its characters act idiotic and very mentally unwell, borderline schizophrenic. Like, why are they acting like that? Oh fuck, I forgot. It's because they're not written, they're programmed like an ATM machine. Just input your orders and receive your results. Choosing to depict first ever openly queer matriarchal group of women as a witchery performing cult with highly questionable and alarming rituals incorporating children is a choice. I don't know how playing into a highly traumatic, historically damaging, and unfavorable portrayal of atypical women as satanic, evil witches with hidden agendas could benefit either lesbian community or women at large. But here we are. If it's intentional, it's a very misguided and a fucked up way of taking the power back, and if it's not, it's just dumb. Also, pitting them against a group of people who are celebrated within the franchise and the community as a symbol of purity and justice is a choice. Expecting us to accept and root for a character who has done nothing but kill or attempt to kill others is also a choice. Wanting us to care about the reunion/separation of two objectively terrible people is also a choice. Actually, making them our main characters is the most goated decision Leslie Headland has ever made, right after signing on to be an assistant of, as Meryl Streep would put him, the god in flesh. Anyone who has enough of an ego thinking thinking they can successfully pull off gray morality in Star Wars because they find it aesthetically pleasing will fail and has failed. In reality, even George Lucas himself knew better than to ever fully attempt to tackle highly philosophical or morally challenging subjects. He only ever left the ideas of balance, force, evil versus good to interpretation, mythologizing them, or fully materialized them into being something absolutely clinical and scientific like midichlorians. And there's no better metaphor for this than the incorporation of Darth Plagueis' twin brother Darth Plagueis non-wise in the show. The scene dedicated to his story is unchallengeably one of the best moments in the prequels for many. A tale of demise of the most powerful being in history is intriguing to hear, not because of the questions it answers, but because of the questions it never does. What makes it work is not only the information given, but that coupled with what is not. A Tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise is a mythological tale that works the best as a folk tale, rather than a plot device. Demystifying the most powerful Sith that ever lived is a work of one hell of an egotistical idiot who thinks too much of their intelligence. In other terms, you can't just put such powerful mythical being in your story just to use them as a punchline of the most funny, unfunny nun joke ever created.